Excellencies, heads of state and government, ambassadors, heads of delegations, and esteemed delegates, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to address the 79th regular session of the United Nations General Assembly for the first time as President on behalf of the government and people of Liberia after a smooth back-to-back democratic transition. Liberia congratulates His Excellency Philemon Yagon on his election as President of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly. You can be assured of Liberia's support as you steer the affairs of the General Assembly. I extol His Excellency Dennis Francis for his astute leadership during his presidency of the 78th session of the General Assembly and commend his determination to inspire and rekindle hope globally. I deeply thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres for the remarkable and visionary leadership he continues to provide in pursuit of our collective mandate. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in the summer of 1945, Liberia joined other nations in San Francisco as one of the original signatories to the United Nations Charter. On that fatal day, the world, having suffered the scourge of war, was full of hope and determined to reverse the past. Nearly 80 years on, and reflecting on the preamble of the United Nations Charter, which declares our commitment to promote social progress and better standard of life and larger freedom, we ask the question, has our reaffirmation of faith in the dignity and worth of human person made 8 decades ago, had been realized? We must admit that the world has changed and the frontiers that we now embrace are different. In it, greed, insensitivity to the poor, the international drug epidemic, money laundering, dynamics of climate change, and the impact of social media must compel us to rethink our approach to global peace and security. Our beloved United Nations must undergo the institutional and philosophical reflections required to respond to the new age. As we assemble under this theme, unity in diversity for advancement of peace, sustainable development, and human dignity for everyone, everywhere, it is important to recognize the shared values and collective efforts that come from our unity with diversity. We must acknowledge these as essential for the advancement of peace, sustainable development, and the inherent dignity of every human being worldwide. By doing so, we can build a better world where no one is left behind. Like many nations gathered at this assembly, Liberia recommits to the Sustainable Development Goals. Since the end of the country's conflict, we have strived to follow a development path that will lead to building a capable state. 12 years ago, we dared to dream of a future within the realm of possibility, harboring core national aspirations to transform the future. Named Liberia Rising or Vision 2030, it has been the driving force behind all of our planning efforts. The building of blocks and the tenets of Vision 2030 are significantly aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Our government's Arrest agenda is a comprehensive approach developed to address the economic and social needs of millions of Liberians, especially the youth, who account for 60% of our population. with emphasis on agriculture, roads, infrastructure, development, justice, and the rule of law, education, sanitation, health, and tourism. The agenda had mainstreamed the SDGs as is designed to take Liberia to the finish line of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. The fight against poverty, the promotion of human dignity, a steadfast commitment. Despite our progress, poverty remains a significant challenge, with over half of our population living below the poverty line. The Sustainable Development Goals aim to eradicate poverty in all forms by 2030, ensure social protection for the poor and vulnerable, improve the access to essential services. Liberia is dedicated to assessing the levels and the causes of poverty and implementing strategies to reduce it and promote shared prosperity. My government also acknowledges pressing need to address maternal and newborn mortality by implementing robust monitoring and evaluation of health services in the country to accelerate the reduction of maternal and newborn mortality. We are particularly blessed and pleased with the United Nations HC Joint Mission to Liberia this year, which concluded a commitment to combat the high burden of increasing newborn deaths. We welcome the United Nations General Assembly's decision to declare July 25th as the International Day of Women and Girls of African Descent this year. This significant milestone acknowledges that women and girls of African descent have unique opportunities, but they also have challenges that the global fight against slavery and racism is necessary to achieve gender equality. Liberia credits its credentials by producing the first woman president of the United Nations General Assembly, Angie Brooks Randall, and first female president of Africa, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Liberia has witnessed and continues to witness the immense contribution of women and girls of African descent in politics, culture, and every area of societal development. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Liberia has enjoyed uninterrupted peace for almost 2 decades, following the 14 years of civil conflict. During this time, we have held 4 democratic elections, with last year's election marking the 4th since the return to democratic order in 2006. In January this year, Liberia achieved a historic milestone by peacefully transitioning from one democratic government to the other. This progress is significant because before the 2018 transition, the last democratic transition occurred in 1944, about 74 years earlier. We are gradually fostering and solidifying our democratic culture, ensuring that democracy is here to stay in Liberia. Now it is time for our people to reap the democratic dividends. The rule of law is fundamental for peace, justice, strong institution, and dignity for a human person. Liberia is taking significant strides towards openness, transparency, and accountability by empowering and supporting transparent institutions. Our government is committed to implementing audit recommendations by the General Audit Commission to restore public and donors' confidence in the governance system and improve regional and international cooperation. In addition, the country has taken a major step in confronting its conflict past to ensure accountability and justice for crimes and other human rights violations committed during the war and promote healing and national reconciliation. A significant development in our transitional justice process was the signing on May 2, 2024, of the Executive Order 131 to create the Office of Establishment of War and Economic Crime Court for Liberia, a key recommendation from the Truth and Reconciliation process in Liberia. Our actions align with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, joint follow-up on impunity and past human rights violations. As we embark on the process and acknowledge the enormity of the task, my government seeks the support of the United Nations, partners, stakeholders in the pursuit of justice for victims, peace, and reconciliation. Liberia is facing a drug crisis that is affecting our youth and jeopardizing the country's future. This epidemic, driven by international criminal enterprises and their networks, poses a severe threat. In response, we have not only declared the drug epidemic a health emergency and a national security threat, but we have also been taking steps to address this issue by establishing a dedicated national body to tackle drug abuse in Liberia. I urge international community to join Liberia in addressing this escalating drug crisis. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the world is facing numerous crises, including global threats such as disease, security, and climate change, as well as food and resource shortages. Our vulnerabilities are evident, and we need to use a collective knowledge to find solutions that will preserve the planet for future generations. Climate change is undeniably real, and its threat to our environment and the way of life is becoming increasingly apparent. We must take urgent action to address this threat, including cooperative efforts to implement Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. Liberia, as the most forested country in West Africa, with over half of the land covered by forests, plays a vital role in biodiversity and environmental sustainability. As a result, our country is taking important steps to lead conversation on climate action. My government has called on our legislators and stakeholders to begin looking at the Paris Agreement, particularly under Article 6, to help advance actions towards establishing Liberia's nationally determined contribution to combat climate change. While we take these actions, we are mindful of the need to build capacity and invest in critical areas of our economy, such as using alternative financing for investment in the blue and green economy and technological transfer to support these climate actions. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the goals we set for ourselves and the future are better served on the foundation of peace and security. Having enjoyed peace for over 2 decades following a long-running conflict, we aim to promote peace and stability at home, in the region, and globally. The threat of conflict to our shared world underscores the importance of collaborative efforts to foster regional and global stability and peace. Therefore, we support all the UN's effort to address peace and security issues worldwide. Liberia is concerned about escalating security challenges in the West African region, including terrorism and economic and political instability. These pose significant threat to regional peace. So we urge full dialogue and cooperation among West African nations to address these issues effectively. Meanwhile, Liberia firmly stands with the rest of West Africa in a resolve to maintain our 50-year-old Regional Economic Commission, ECOWAS, intact. We oppose efforts to disintegrate our union and will not accept the region being used for proxy conflicts. We look at the AU and the UN to support us in keeping the regional body united. Similarly, at a global level, we call for an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East to provide civilians an essential humanitarian relief. We urge both Israel and the Palestinians to engage in negotiations towards lasting peace, including a two-state solution. Additionally, we see the ongoing conflict in the Ukraine as a threat to global peace and security. Therefore, there is an urgent need for a peaceful resolution that also respects Ukraine's territorial integrity. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this year's Assembly is a pivotal moment for Liberia's bid to ascend to the African non-permanent seat of the Nations Security Council 2026. We have proudly announced our candidacy. We look forward to the support of the member states to vote Liberia overwhelmingly to the seat of the Security Council. We can work with Council members to promote peace, justice, and security. Liberia is dedicated to promoting sustainable growth and ensuring human dignity for all. Liberia is prepared to work together with the United Nations and global allies and international community to accomplish the sustainable development goals, establish a fair, peaceful, and sustainable world. The commitment to unity is deeply ingrained in Liberia's history as a founding member of the United Nations and a post-war international institution, as well as regional and sub-regional organizations. It also affirms our strong belief in multilateralism and international rules and based world built on shared values and principles are crucial to the future. The future of a more peaceful, prosperous, sustainable world must be all-encompassing, fair, and dignified for everyone worldwide. One United Nations, one world. Thank you, and thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Liberia. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Mokgweetsi Masisi, President of the Republic of Botswana. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I wish to start by extending my congratulations to you on your election as President of the General Assembly at its 79th session. You can be assured of Botswana's full support as you steer the work of this august House. Mr. President, this Assembly continues to meet on the backdrop of an age of multiple and interconnected crises which were triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic and geopolitical tensions between major powers. These crises have been further compounded by the Israel-Hamas war, which erupted shortly after we concluded last year's high-level week. The attacks on innocent civilians on both sides are unacceptable and thus stand condemned. In the same vein, we wish to express our deep concern of the situation in the Gaza Strip, where the war has resulted in catastrophic humanitarian crises and unprecedented fatalities for civilians, children, and humanitarian workers. I should also register Botswana's concern regarding the loss of lives of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Northeast, UNRWA personnel. I take this opportunity to pay tribute to UNRWA personnel and all humanitarian workers and their commitment to deliver aid, save lives, and alleviate suffering in Gaza and elsewhere. We owe them a debt of gratitude, and they deserve our full protection. Botswana also abhors attacks on UNRWA installations and condemns disinformation and misinformation campaigns against this life-saving General Assembly mandated agency. Botswana firmly supports the work of UNRWA, which entails providing humanitarian and development assistance and protection to Palestine refugees pending the just resolution of the question of the Palestinian question. In this regard, Botswana is proud to be among the countries that joined the Statement of Shared Commitments on UNRWA, which reaffirms support for the agency, its mandate, its staff, and highlights its indispensable role during this difficult time. Mr. President, we wish to reiterate the centrality of the two-state solution in resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the attainment of a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace. We therefore urge parties to commit to a political process that will pave the way for the realization of the two-state solution in which Palestine and Israel live side by side in peace and security based on the pre-1967 borders. Mr. President, the war in Ukraine also rages on, with no indication of an end in sight. We continue to underscore the need to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine in line with the United Nations Charter and international law. We also call on parties to give diplomacy and dialogue a chance and to seek a peaceful resolution. In Africa, the guns still have not gone silent. We continue to grapple with armed conflict, terrorism, and potentially explosive geopolitical tensions. We commend the African Union, sub-regional bodies, as well as the UN for their efforts in addressing these challenges. In this vein, we welcome the adoption of United Nations Security Council Resolution 2719 of 2023 on the provision of support by the United Nations to AU-led peace support operations on a case-by-case basis and look forward to its operationalization. Mr. President, I must add that this time of escalated armed conflicts, violent crime, and humanitarian crisis requires intensified efforts and more vigilance to protect human rights, advance humanitarian action, and promote the accountability in line with the UN Charter, international law, international humanitarian law, as well as relevant principles such as the responsibility to protect, or R2P. Mr. President, it is evident that peace is under strain across the world. It needs to be revitalized. However, that task can not only be left to multilateral and regional bodies. Governments have a responsibility to create conditions that enable peace to thrive within their countries. Key steps that governments should take include, among others, building effective institutions, committing to good governance, protection of human rights, and upholding democratic values. As many are aware, Botswana has a long track record of commitment to these democratic principles. The implementation of recommendations from our recently concluded constitutional review process, as well as our upcoming general elections on the 30th of October 2024, provide opportunities to deepen our democracy and strengthen our good governance credentials. Mr. President, regrettably, while on the one hand, the scourge of war rages on the other hand, the promises of sustainable development is in great peril. It is deeply concerning that with only 6 years before the 2030 deadline, sustainable development goals are way off track. We learned from the latest Sustainable Development Goals report that only 17% of the goals are on track, while the rest range from moderate progress to stagnation and even regression. there's a lot of work to do. We must take inspiration from and build on the success achieved in the reduction in global child mortality, prevention of HIV infections, attaining girls' parity with boys in education, increased access to energy and the internet, while also scaling up action and investments in areas which are lagging far behind, particularly poverty eradication. The levels of extreme poverty remain disturbingly high, but we cannot attain sustainable development without eradicating poverty in all its forms and manifestations. Poverty eradication is the sine qua non of sustainable development. A comprehensive approach will be required to move the needle in the fight against poverty. We therefore endorse the call for comprehensive social protection systems and inclusive economic policies. Pro-poor policies should also be complemented and reinforced by policies which spur inclusive economic growth and create sustainable employment. Policy interventions that aim to leave no one behind ought to be matched by adequate SDG financing. In this vein, my delegation reiterates the call for predictable, sustainable, and sufficient development finance to developing countries from all funding sources. In addition to livelihood issues, progress should also be accelerated in addressing other forms of inequality within countries, especially gender inequality. Meaningful action is needed to empower women and girls in areas where they are left behind and to combat harmful cultural practices and gender-based violence. Mr. President, extreme weather events and related natural disasters continue to remind us of the severity of climate crisis and the urgency of mitigation and adaptation. In our sub-region, Southern Africa, the El Niño phenomena induced drought and floods, which resulted in devastating consequences on livelihoods and a humanitarian situation that affected over 61 million people. I take this opportunity to reiterate the Southern Africa Development Community (SADC) regional humanitarian appeal of at least $5.5 billion aimed at augmenting domestic resources of the affected member states, including efforts to resource mobilization from national, regional, and international partners in response to the impacts of El Niño-induced drought and floods. I cannot overemphasize the need for adequate climate finance for effective climate action. We continue to remind developed countries of their annual $100 billion commitment in climate finance for developing countries until 2025 and call for a more ambitious goal thereafter. Mr. President, efforts at attaining sustainable development ought to be redoubled in countries in special situations, in particular small island developing states, SIDS, least developing countries, LDCs, and landlocked developing countries, LLDCs, which are disproportionately affected by development challenges. Botswana, as an LDC and current chair of the group of LLDCs at the UN, is deeply concerned by enormity of challenges faced by LLDCs in their effort to implement the 2030 Agenda and its SDGs. With no direct territorial access to the sea, LLDCs struggle with international trade, connectivity, and economic development. Our countries are cut off from the global marketplace and without the means to develop adequate transport and logistics infrastructure, and inevitably face significant challenges in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The forthcoming third United Nations Conference on Landlocked Developing Countries, LLDCs 3, from 10th to 13th December in 2024 in Gaborone, Botswana, under the theme Driving Progress Through Partnerships, will provide an opportunity to effectively address these challenges in an ambitious, action-oriented, and forward-looking program of action. I therefore invite transit countries, development partners, and other stakeholders to join us in the beautiful and vibrant Gaborone as we shape the future for our 32 member countries. Mr. President, as you rightly observe, it is only when we act together that we can effectively deliver meaningful progress for people, planet, prosperity, and peace while leaving no one behind. Without a doubt, the United Nations-led multilateral system remains an indispensable platform for the effective global action that this moment demands. It is therefore of paramount importance that the multilateral framework remains fit for purpose. The onus is on us as member states to ensure that our intergovernmental processes enable rather than stifle effective multinational action and international cooperation. We must not allow the current geopolitical tensions and great power rivalries to get in the way of progress. Our shared values, norms, and interests, as expressed in the UN Charter, the 2030 Agenda, and other relevant frameworks, should remain the North Star that guides our engagements. The spirit of consensus and solidarity ought to be at the front and center of our actions. Mr. President, allow me to conclude by reaffirming Botswana's commitment to working constructively on all agenda items before the General Assembly during this session. This session offers opportunities to turbocharge action for peace, sustainable development, and human rights for the benefit of present and future generations. Let us seize the moment. I thank you. Good afternoon.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Botswana. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Emmanuel Mokgweetsi